Hello and welcome to this session of the ChangeNOW Summit devoted to explorers with a purpose, men and women who choose to fight for the planet and not use their adventures just for travel or a taste for the unknown. I'm Daphnée Denis, Editor-in-Chief for Brut Media, a global media organization in the United States, and I will be your host for today. First, we will hear from Jimmy Nelson, whose own journey of discovery involves the medium of photography to shine a dignified light on indigenous cultures. Jimmy Nelson.
Good morning, everybody. This is exciting. It's been a while since I've had the opportunity to share my life, my journeys, my adventures. So for the next 20 minutes, sit back, relax if you can, and come with me on this exploration. It wasn't so long ago I was here. I was in Chukotka. I'm sort of turning on the map here. It's in the Chukotka, if anybody knows where it is, here it is. It's right in the far northeastern corner of Russia. And I was on this sort of journey. I was trying to sort of meet the Chukchi. And the Chukchi were sort of, they're a group of about 60 nomadic reindeer herders. And they're split into two groups. They're called brigades. And they live in this sort of wide expanse. And I thought it would be quite straightforward to sort of find them. And I'd met this guide. And he said, I said, well, how are we going to get there? And he said, well, my brother's got this nice big tundra tank. And I said, well, great, and I've got about 3 weeks for this journey. And he sort of looked at me very confused. And he said, well, 3 weeks, that's going to be quite difficult. And I said, well, what do you mean difficult? And he said, because Chukotka's a large place. And I said, well, how big is it actually? And he said, well, it's about the size of France. Okay, so you're talking about an area the size of France. It's white, it's flat. There's essentially no features whatsoever, ice and grass, frozen grass. And there are two groups of 30 people who nomadically wander. And I said, yeah, but I've only got 3 weeks. He says, yeah, but I can't actually guarantee you we're going to find them. And he sort of gave me this choice. He said, are you going to come with me? And I'm trying to change the picture. There we go. And I said, well, how are we going to find them? And he said, well, that's quite easy. And I said, well, with a GPS, with a telephone, are we going to see smoke in the air? Or is there a map? And he says, well, no, there's nothing like that. We're going to get into this tank indefinitely. It doesn't go faster than about 20 kilometers an hour. And we're going to follow reindeer droppings. They're reindeer herders. Changing the picture again. Here we go. And so I said, you expect me to indefinitely get with you into a tank for an undefined period of time across the area the size of France in minus 50 degrees following reindeer droppings. And he says, well, that's probably the only way we're going to find the Chukchi. So we sort of got into this tank. It was February, and off we went. And we disappeared off into the tundra. 1 week, 2 weeks, it was quite phenomenal. There was actually nothing. This is how we'd wake up in the morning. Outside was about minus 50. Inside could be anything up to minus 30, but we sort of eventually sort of began to survive and found a way. And then after about 3 weeks, we came over a mountain and we saw this in the distance. These are called yuranga. This is their tents. But if you spent 3 weeks sitting in a tank in minus 30 degrees centigrade and you see a tent like this on the horizon, it feels like you're arriving in Manhattan. So I was sort of kind of excited, and we sort of arrived into the tent and they were having this picnic around the yuranga, as one does in minus 50 degrees centigrade, with the first sun rising over the horizon in the winter in northeastern Chukotka. I sort of leapt out of this tank, overly enthusiastic, with not a lot of dignity, to be honest, and sort of landed on my, trying to change the picture. Here we go. We go again, and we go again, and we change the picture, and it's not changing. Here we go. And I landed on my knees, and I saw the chief. And he was sort of sitting there, eating away at his lunch, and he sort of looked at me very curiously. And I sort of grabbed my cameras, and with no dignity whatsoever, I sort of leapt up to him, kneeled in front of him, and wanted to take a picture. And he looked up to me, and he looked up at our guide, and he sort of waved his finger, put down his bone and his knife. And the whole group looked at him, expecting what he was going to say. And he looked up to me, and he said the one word in Russian that I recognized. He waved his finger backwards and forwards, and he went, "Нет." And I went, what do you mean, "Нет"? "Нет, I've spent 3 weeks in this tank traveling across sort of northeastern Siberia. I'm here to see you. I'm here to photograph you." And he says, but we don't want any pictures. We don't want any intrusion whatsoever. So I was left sort of somewhat confronted. And it made me stop and think. And I'm going to pause the story briefly. I will explain to you what happened towards the end. But in the meantime, I want to explain why, at the age of 50, I'm sitting in a tundra tank, traveling indefinitely across an expanse of ice the size of France, looking for a group of 30 people who herd reindeer. This is me. I grew up as a child, obviously it's somewhat a number of years ago, and I traveled extensively with my parents. My father was a geologist. And towards the end of my puberty, I sort of kind of wasn't overly enamored with what had happened to me in my institution, the school I was in. So I ran away. I ran away at the age of 17. And I wanted to reconnect with what I'd felt as a child, this sort of pure existence in the developing world, this world of trust. So I disappeared off to Tibet for a period of the better part of about 3 years to try and find a sort of a reconnection with people. And I was inspired by Tintin. Because my hair had fallen out as a teenager, so I was somewhat confronted by my identity, my aesthetic, to be honest, and it's not a big secret, but I didn't really like myself. So I thought I have to go and find some people somewhere on the planet where I fit, where I'm seen for who I am, not for how I look and how I feel. And by default, in the early 80s, I wandered across the length of Tibet. And on that journey, something wonderful began to happen. I didn't really understand it at the time. But there was this sort of, by using a camera, at the end of a consolidation of a relationship, I started to be included. I started to be seen, almost perhaps being understood, and ultimately, perhaps that's the definitive journey of all, be loved. So for many, many years now, not that I have any grey hair to be counted to be seen, but it's been a long time, I've been making these pictures. And by default, in 2014, I published my first book. And it was quite a complicated process to get it published in the first place. And I remember being told by all the publishers, well, who are you, Jimmy Nelson? I said, well, good question. I've been asking that myself for the last 45 years. We'll quickly Google you, as we now do nowadays. And I wasn't to be found anywhere. There's a Canadian baseball player and an American ventriloquist. They're the only other two Jimmy Nelsons that exist online. So they said, well, you don't exist, so we're not going to publish your book. Anyway, one publisher took a bit of a long shot. The book was published, and it became quite a phenomenon by default. There was an enormous amount of conversation and questions that started to arise. First question, as always, who are you? Good question. I've been asking that myself still today. What are you, and how do you have the authority to make these pictures and title your book before they pass away? Are you studied as an anthropologist, as a journalist, a filmmaker? What are you? And one individual decided to sort of really go for me. And it was this sort of Jimmy Nelson's wrong-headed obsession with vanishing indigenous cultures. And I must admit, wrong-headed it is not, but obsession it is. And this is what I want to explain to you this morning. Now, I'm going to refer to a piece of paper. And a colleague of mine, I work with this beautiful, wonderful team in Amsterdam, which is my home base. And Lily, the other day, wrote this down for me. And this encapsulates what I feel. So I'm going to take you on 3 pillars. And they're to be called to see, to connect, and to honor. So please read them quietly with me, because I think these words really encapsulate what I'm about to communicate. So to see, this is where we will begin. In many ways, we do not fully exist until we are seen. So let us go simply beyond looking and truly see all of humanity for who we really are, beautiful and worthy. So I'm going to take you now on the journey of seeing. I'm going to take you deep into the wilds of Papua New Guinea, a part of the world I truly love, and high into the highlands, into a community called the Huli. Now, when you arrive in a community, you can't arrive as I arrived in Chukotka with the chief of the Chukchi, with your cameras blaring and waving, with your entourage and with helicopters and with your long lenses. You have to arrive with dignity. You have to arrive with vulnerability. You have to arrive with patience, time, and ultimately empathy. And if you sit and you wait and you strip yourself of all your arrogance and you look up and you begin to praise, you begin to make connection, you don't need a language. You can do it by truly seeing the other. And I use these sort of old-fashioned plate cameras. So you spend sort of often weeks waiting. And then the chief comes towards you and you can look up to them and you start to sort of honor and you start to praise and you start to ooh and ah and maybe even flirt. And then they begin to stand. Then they begin to become proud. Then if the light is aligned and you've used the community using reflectors, you can start to make a connection a connection of beauty, a connection of dignity. The chief comes, the chief's brothers come with his sons, and the portraits enthuse. And then it goes further. Then you get excited. You think, wow, when I was walking up to the village the other day, I walked past this wonderful waterfall. Wouldn't it be an extraordinary opportunity to see if I can manage to persuade the huli to come with me and stand in all their glory in this natural setting? But it takes days and weeks to get into a position like this. And if you achieve it, and if you're lucky, at the end of the process, this is what you can see and ultimately share. So it's not a picture. It's this very, I'm sure there's elements of autism and Asperger's in me, but it's this sort of alignment. I see the natural world. I see the light. I see the humans who live in it. I see their dignity, their beauty, and their culture. And what I'm trying to do is encapsulate it in one image to stir you. Not so long ago, I was giving a talk to a group of kids, and they were somewhat bored looking on their smartphones. And I screamed at the top of my voice, "Avatar!" And they all looked up and they threw their telephones away and they said, "Are you making Avatar 2?" I said, "No, but they exist for real." And one kid was very funny. He said, "But they've got yellow faces and not blue." And I said, "Oh, no, it's not about the color of their faces. It's about what they represent as real human beings. They're not digital creations. They still truly exist. Human beings that we have to see to honor in all their beauty, because perhaps they have something that we've lost." Then you go to the second pillar, and this is what Lily wrote. It's called to connect. The planet needs us to connect with oneself, with others, and the natural world. Once we connect, we could thrive. And once we thrive, this is what Lily did, that's why I'm reading Lily's text, we could dare to love. And everywhere I go, I try to fulfill a promise of reciprocity, that I have to return what I've taken. The images I make are not mine. It's their culture, it's their dignity, it's their grace. I'm only the intermediary that tries to share them with you. And I remember returning back to the Yakel in Vanuatu, this sort of fantastic archipelago in the southern Pacific. And they live on this island called Tana, and they live around these magnificent banyan trees. They're absolutely colossal at the base of Mount Yasur. And at night you sleep high up in the trees, and you can see this thundering volcano lighting the sky with this sort of blood-red clouds. And you feel so brutally connected to the natural world. And I remember returning and with my first book and sitting with the chief under the tree, and he's sort of very proud, and he sort of looked at me. And he said, "Jimmy, let's make a picture." And as we were making the picture, he said, "Jimmy, there's a problem." I was very excited to go back to the Yakel on the island of Tana, because I'd made them a big promise, a promise that one day I would return with my book, within which the pictures were published that I'd made of them. So here I was, arriving in the village, and they were standing there, hanging in the tree, looking at me with these big, expectant eyes. And I said, "It's Jimmy, and I've got the book." And they sort of ran to me, they sat down, we started opening the pages, telling the stories, reminiscing on the experiences from before. And then the chief leant in, and he said, "Oh, Jimmy," he actually spoke just a little bit of English. He said, "Jimmy, I'm very proud, and I'm very happy you came back." And I was very flattered and feeling a moment of sort of self-congratulation, until he looked at me and he said, "But Jimmy, there's one very big problem." And I sort of turned around and said, but what's the problem? Here's the book. And he says, "I know, I don't have a problem with you, but I'm afraid the rest of the village do, because they all want a book too. So next time you come, you have to bring 85 books. So if you're talking about connection, I'm connected and indebted to the Yakel for the rest of my life. So I'm going to be on a regular basis returning one of these 83 books. And there's also that, I mean, if you're talking about connection, humor was wonderful. So let's get to the last pillar, and let's refer back to Lily's text, to honor. To honor is an act of giving. So let us be compassionate, curious, and brave. Brave is extremely important. By celebrating all of humanity, that's not only them, it's us, to shine a light on the ancient wisdom and to honor Mother Earth. Now, if there's one story that encapsulates this, it has to be here in the Altai Mountains in Mongolia with the Kazakh. You will rarely come across a culture, a group of outrageously beautiful, proud human beings who resonate and are balanced with their culture and the environment that they live in. When I first visited the Kazakh about 12 years ago, there were only about 40 of them left, primarily old men with these old ancient traditions of their horses and their eagle hunting around these magnificent Altai mountains. And I promised Ergalim that I would return with the book. And many years later, I did return, and here was his son. And I ran up to his son. I said, "Where's your dad? Where's your dad? I've got the book." And his son said, "Oh, Jimmy, you're late." I said, "I'm late? What do you mean I'm late?" So he said, "Well, it's been a number of years now." And I said, "I know, he died." "Oh, no, he died. Yeah, he died. He died not so long ago." And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm late. I should have come earlier." And he said, "But it's okay. Come, we've got something to show you." So we walked into their house. A little house, a very humble house at the bottom of the mountain. And there in the corner, there was a shrine to Ergalim. And there were a number of my books. It's strange, I hadn't sent any of the books back. And many pictures on the wall, most of which I hadn't made. And then I had this sort of moment of sort of deja vu, and I went, "Oh no, this is what everybody had warned me. Don't interfere with these cultures. Don't photograph them. Don't share them. Don't talk about them, because you will change them." And I remember sitting on the floor and almost shaking. And he looked at me and he said, "What's wrong?" And he said, we're happy you came. We're happy you made these pictures all those years ago, because you did change something, Jimmy. You did change something. You changed something for the better. We have something to share with you." And I was somewhat confused at this stage. He said, "Make sure tomorrow morning at 4 o'clock, you're standing at the base of the mountain around the corner here." So I remember getting up very early the next morning, standing there in the dark. And as the sun began to rise, this procession of not 40 eagle hunters, because of those original 40, 20 had now passed away because of their age, but 400 came in this procession over this mountaintop. Women, children, horses, donkeys, goats, camels, you name it, with their eagles and with their tradition. And as they came down, they started to clap. And as they came down, I started to cry. Because they said, "Because of your images, we have reconnected with our value. We've reconnected with our honor, with our dignity. We've disconnected from the cities we were migrating to, back to our culture, back to the natural world that we live in, that we're proud of. We are the proud Kazakhs. Yes, things have changed because of your pictures, but they're only changing for the better. We're becoming richer as a process." So if there's ever this moment of honor, it had to have been in that case. Now we're going to quickly go back to Chukotka. If you can remember, I was on my knees. I had my cameras ready. I'd spent weeks sitting in this tank, so I was brutally impatient, and I was waving my cameras around in panic like a spoilt little child. This is not so long ago, and I'm 53, so you would have imagined by now I would have learned. And the chief was waving his finger going, "No, no, 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 no." And I was going, "Oh, but what am I going to do?" And he looked at me via the translation. He said, "But what a stupid question." I said, "Well, what do you mean a stupid question?" He said, "Well, haven't you come here to see us? Haven't you come here to live with us? Haven't you come here to hunt with us? Haven't you come here to understand us?" And I remember being brutally confronted by this fact and thinking, oh, perhaps it was just about the pictures. And he said, "You can stay, but you can't make any pictures. But come and live with us. Don't worry, we know it's minus 50 degrees centigrade, and this is an environment you're very uncomfortable with, but we will look after you." So for the next few weeks, I stayed, and I lived with them, and I experienced an existence that's almost impossible to communicate and share with you. But towards the end, something extraordinary happened. I looked at them, and I said, "You know, you are highly intelligent, evolved human beings." We had a wonderful conversation with this translator. "What are you doing here in the year of 2019, living in minus 50 degrees centigrade, herding reindeer? You could live here in this block of flats." And they said, "We did, not so long ago. We were invited. We were subsidized to live in this environment. And after 6 months, we all became extremely depressed and extremely unhappy, and many of us alcoholics, etc., etc., etc. And we chose to come back here. Because this is where we belong, because we have a connection here, we decided that if we were to exist one more day in our life, we would prefer to have it here as a chukshi, living in minus 50 degrees centigrade in a tent with our reindeer, because this is who we are, this is what we feel, this is the connection we have to Mother Earth, this is what makes us happy." And I found that the most extraordinary experience, and I would have never felt it or seen it if I hadn't have not been using a camera, if I had to live with them, their brutal but extraordinarily loving existence. So as a result of these wonderful, unending journeys of personal discovery, myself and my team, we have a dream. the dream is to culturally bring back the planets together in this culturally diverse way. And by doing that, we have a foundation called the Jimmy Nelson Foundation, when I can get to the slide. And it's primarily about education. How can we translate this wonderful wisdom through imagery, through films, and through stories, and rebalance the world, bring that wealth back here, at the same time as honor and dignify these indigenous cultures for the value of their humanity. And I'm going to leave you with a 2-minute clip. So hold on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy, for sharing your life's mission with us and sharing it so vividly. Up next, we'll hear from Romain Pilliard, Alexia and Heïdi Sevestre. Up next, I'm joined by explorers who have used their skills, their incredible physical strength, and their talent, their knowledge, to help scientists to fight climate change and to bring as much knowledge as possible to the scientific world by, let's be honest, doing some quite impressive sporting work at the same time. I'm joined by Romain Pilliard from his boat, as you can see, he's a sailor and entrepreneur who created the platform Use It Again to encourage people to use the circular economy and also collaborate with scientists. He's about to try the hardest selling record in the world. He'll tell us all about it in a minute. I'm also joined by glaciologist Heïdi Sevestre, whose project, who just finished leading her project Climate Sentinels, a women-only project, which was quite impressive as she was skiing through the glaciers of Svalbard all alone. Well, not all alone, there were four, carrying 50 kilograms with her every day in very difficult conditions and with a few polar bears around her. She will also tell us why she was doing that, and she's about to start recording and documenting the last tropical glaciers. There are tropical glaciers, which I found out about quite recently thanks to her. Finally, we're joined by Alexia Barrier, who's here with me. She's a skipper, and she's also put her work to the use of science by taking recordings for scientists and documenting the ocean world as she works. Alexia, since you're here and I introduced you last, we're going to start with you. Can you please explain, first of all, how you became so convinced that you had to act for climate as a skipper, as someone who's in contact with nature?
Thank you for this question. Hi, Heïdi. Hi, Romain. First of all, I have to say I had a chance to sail since I'm 3 years old. So I spent most of my time when I was not at school on a boat with my parents. It was a small boat, but for me it was the freedom, the adventure was starting at this age. I was in Antibes in the Mediterranean Sea, and I was really falling in love at this time with the sea and the ocean. And then I saw the first Vendee Globe. It's a race around the world. On the TV, I was 12. And I decided that one day I will do it. For that, I had to do many races offshore, single-handed, double-handed, and with crew. And one day, 10 years ago, I came back from a race, arriving in England, and for the first time in my life, arriving close to the shore, I was not feeling the strength of the shore. I was not smelling the earth. I was seeing in the water waste and trash everywhere. At this time, it was the 5th of June 2009, I decided to do something for the ocean. So I was talking to scientists, to many people, and I went to build an association, foundation for my planet, to be a tool for the scientific research on the ocean. That's how it starts.
Romain, you yourself have a similar story as someone who's also a sailor. You shared with me that the Erica oil spill was something that decided you to take action. Can you explain that and maybe how you started yourself collaborating with science and scientists?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm on my boat in La Trinité-sur-Mer. Congratulations, Alexia, for your Vendee Globe you accomplished. And hi, Heïdi from Svalbard. My story is quite different from the one of Alexia, because I started, even if I had a maritime culture, I started quite late when I was a student to sail seriously, I could say. And in 2000, after my studies, when I was sailing and training for very competitive race, a very demanding race named La Solitaire de Figaro, that was in 2000, and we had this cargo Erica, which sank out of Brittany, and we.
I think we're losing.
Birds were dying, fish were dying. Is that okay? Connection is okay? Daphnée?
It's going quite well. We lost you there for a minute about Erica, but you're back.
Okay. Sorry, yeah. So I was saying that this moment was very particular, and I was wondering what we are doing, racing for pleasure, so only about sport, and in the middle of this nature, which is incredible and very beautiful here in Brittany. This was full of oil, so that was quite an astonished time, and as things about nature were being developed in my head, I said, "Oh, what are we doing on Earth? Something's going wrong." and this is maybe a time to act. So I started the Use It Again campaign much later, but as you said, this Erica episode was very important for me.
And finally, Heïdi, hi, joining us from the Arctic. You're a scientist yourself, you're a glaciologist, but you shared with me that your first love was being in the mountains. So you kind of found this job and were like, this is amazing, I'm going to get to be in the mountains, in glaciers, and ski all the time. And then you sort of had an awakening to how important the job that you were setting out to do was. Can you explain your own journey getting to where you are with everyone?
Yeah, absolutely. And good morning, Daphnée. Good morning, Romain and Alexia. Really nice to see you guys. But exactly, I'm a scientist today, and I became a glaciologist, a scientist to study glaciers, simply because I thought they looked magnificent. And I've always been absolutely amazed by glacial landscapes. And you're right, when I was a teenager, I was looking for any excuses to spend as much time as possible in the mountains. And one day, a mountain guide from Switzerland told me that some people were getting paid to study glaciers, and we call these people glaciologists. And I thought, oh, wait, hang on, that sounds like a really good idea. And this is what I've become, and I absolutely love my job. It is my biggest passion. But now my job has become really important as well. The fact that glaciers are melting all across the world is directly impacting human populations. And so we are really racing against time. My job today is to try to make the link between what's happening in the field, what I can see in the Arctic or in other places, with the decision makers and with the rest of the world. Things are happening very quickly, and we need to act now.
Part of what you all do is to share with the world images of what you get, obtaining data, etc. Maybe Heïdi, you can tell us about the work that you're doing right now on tropical glaciers. I think you shared with me that they're about to disappear in maybe the next 5 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've just had this fantastic keynote by Jamie Nelson telling us about the importance of pictures, the importance of connecting with these remote environments and these remote populations that we've never heard about. And I started a project called The Last Tropical Glaciers. And what has hit me about these glaciers is that there are still glaciers today along the equator, but no one has ever heard about them. And the problem is they are disappearing. They are disappearing in silence without sharing all their important knowledge and data with us. And this is the reason why I started this project, The Last Tropical Glaciers. And I want to share with you a quote from Babadiou, who is a Senegalese environmentalist. And this quote really resonates with me, and I'm sure with all of us. And he says that in the end, we will conserve only what we love. We will love only what we understand. And we will only understand what we are taught. And this is why we want to raise awareness on these tropical glaciers. With my project, we aim to go to Uganda, because there are glaciers there in East Africa, and create an archive, a video archive of these landscapes before they disappear, to help populations across the world connect with these glaciers and understand their fragility and their importance.
Romain, your next adventure is also quite an athletic feat, but you're also going to be gathering data for science, specifically about noise pollution in the ocean. Can you tell us more about how this came to be and what it is that you're trying to find out through the research that you're doing?
Yes, the Use It Again campaign started in 2016. Is something very particular in the world of sailing, because I refurbished a famous boat, a legendary trimaran, which was former Ellen MacArthur's boat. And my point and my goal is really to show we must save resources. So I sail on this boat using existing materials as much as I can. And I don't want any new sails, new gear, and top technology. It's not that I'm against that. It's just that there are sufficient and enough material here existing that I can use to sail well on this boat. And my next challenge would be for the coming winter, the recall around the world, which is a west-about sailing record. So non-stop 4 months around the world from east to west against prevailing winds. So we'll be 2 on board for this adventure. And it's quite extreme because it's very long, it's very tough. And only 5 people, 5 sailors succeeded since 1895. So it's not a very common sailing record, as you can imagine, and not easy. And for this, I had in mind to be useful for science, and I was saying that I'm gonna sail in very difficult and areas where no one go. There are very few oceanic boats go, so I could probably get some data for science. And I had a long chat with a scientist about the sound of the ocean, and we concluded that I could probably record the sound of the ocean to help fighting against the sound pollution. So it means that I will record the sound of the ocean, which will be analyzed to understand and know which species we will meet. I won't see, obviously, maybe sometimes, but there are many species under our hulls, and with a special microphone, we can detect species which are very far away from, like, the longest is probably 50 miles away from my boat. So it's quite difficult because we want to do this the whole journey. So for 4 months non-stop, I will have a lot of recording to get analyzed. But it's very important because this scientist told me that they don't know much enough about the ocean. And as we all know, we need the ocean. The ocean is one breath out of 2 on Earth for the human being. So you really need to understand more, and that will be a little help. And I'm very happy to organize this, and it's quite difficult on the boat to get this microphone correctly and avoid as much as possible the boat noises. But we're working on it, and I'm quite confident that that should be helpful.
Alexia, you yourself have also used your boat for research. Can you share a little bit more about this? Because you've said something really interesting to me, which was you now don't really envision sailing without actually contributing to science. You think those 2 things go hand in hand now?
Yeah, it's amazing because you can do competition. You can win a competition today and have instruments on board, and it works together. And you can win a race and gather data at sea for scientists. So my job since 10 years with For My Planet is to gather data at sea on salinity and temperature. And it's the density of the water is very important. And as Heïdi is working on, as a glaciologist, we are working quite on the same subject, because when the ice is melting, the density of the ocean is changing, and the ocean currents are regulating the climate. So everything is working together. So it's really important data. We did take more than 10 million data since 10 years, and that helps to calibrate, for example, satellites, because you need in situ data to calibrate the satellite. It's also really important when you do a Vendee Globe. You can imagine there is no one in the big south, in the south of the Indian and in the south of the Pacific. There is no one, absolutely no one, except the birds, albatross maybe, and the wildlife. So there is no data. So scientists, they really need more data in the south, big south, close by the icebergs and Antarctic. So that was really important. And I'm really happy because 10 years ago, I was the only woman doing that, racing and taking care of ocean and, you know, trying to help scientists. And in the last Vendee Globe, we were 5 skippers. So, you know, it's a big improvement and it's really positive. And one of my jobs is also to talk about the ocean to kids. We have more than 20,000 kids following me now. It's really important for me, and I will never take the start of a race without the scientists and the kids together with me, because it sounds like it's not interesting for me. It's no sense.
One of the things you shared with me, and I think all of you kind of had the same message, is that you are seeing the effects of climate change every day in what you do. Every time you take the boat, you know that you're going to see some pretty scary things, but that you remain optimistic. Can you share with us, first of all, how urgent this is, what you see when you're on a race, and then second of all, why do you still have hope?
You know, we know it. It's today. We have to act today. And what can you do? You can just buy more smarter things. When you are buying things for your house, for your kids, or everything, you have an impact on the planet and ocean. And what I see on the ocean when I'm racing is that the storms are longer, stronger, bigger, and the weather is really changing. And because of change of a current in the ocean, the impact onshore is big, is huge. An example was the fire in Australia, coming because the water was colder and the earth was really hot, and it makes strong winds that make a big fire in Australia. So I'm optimistic because we are more and more to act for ocean and planet preservation. I can see in the eyes of kids. I talk to kids every day. Last week I had 2,000 kids on my boat, visiting my boat, the boat of a Vendee Globe, and I see that they understand like that what is happening. So I think with a new generation, we can make something today.
Wonderful. Heïdi, you yourself encountered some pretty extreme phenomena while you were skiing in Svalbard. But you also say that you have hope for the future. Can you speak about that?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I must say that I find it extremely inspiring to hear what Alexia and what Romain are doing. These are true role models. And, you know, as glaciologists, we always aspire to be explorers. And to know that such amazing explorers and athletes want to work with the scientists makes such a huge difference. So I really thank you for that, Romain and Alexia, well done. But I think, you know, it is essential today to remain optimistic. We know we still have a short window to act. And as Alexia said, the window to act is now. It's not in 2030, it's not in 2050. We need to act now. And I'm still in the Arctic today. I just came back from a 4-week long expedition with a team of female scientists. And I know the Arctic like the back of my hand. I've been coming here every day or every year for 13 years. And the conditions we encountered were extremely distressing, extremely worrying. The place where I am right now is called Svalbard, or Spitsbergen. And this is the place on Earth that is warming the fastest, 6 to 7 times faster than the rest of the world. And what is happening here is having a direct impact on the rest of the world. And we faced with my team the worst conditions, storms after storms after storms. We had the highest avalanche level I've ever seen. We've had really crevassed glaciers. And this was so shocking to see how quickly things are happening, that you just want to do one thing, and one thing only is to act as quickly as possible. And we know we can still avoid the worst consequences of climate change if we follow the temperature targets in the Paris Agreement. And this will only happen if we act now.
And the word of the end for Romain from his boat, unless he's not there anymore. Romain, what are you hoping to achieve in your next adventure, and you know, what message do you have to share with the people watching today about how we can make this happen, remain in accordance with the Climate Paris Agreement?
Well, what I want to tell through the Use It Again campaign and the next challenge is really raise awareness about consumptions we all have. So I think we have a common message with Alexia, Heïdi, and we must be really careful I want to show that with an old boat we can do great things. With a refurbished boat we can do big challenges, and it's a proof probably for people in business, for people in their daily life, that we don't absolutely need the latest new things, the latest technologies, the latest very consuming stuff, you know. So it's quite important to have a kind of sobriety, because technology won't save us. We'll participate in the saving us, maybe, but it won't save us. I'm sure about that, and it's not the right time for that now, yet. So we really have a strong message about the resources. The main resource we must care is the ocean, for sure, which is in a very bad state. Every day it's worse and worse. But we are optimistic, and we can change the world, and we have to change now, for sure. And then sharing all this experience with every people, from kids to company CEOs, who can have a big impact. But kids is also very important. I'm godfather of a school in Guadeloupe, and I think it's very important to have this link with the kids, to show them what they could achieve themselves later first, and show them that we care about their future. And this is a very important message, that saying that we fight all together. You know, it's not like we will help them. It's not we abandon them with a earth in a not a very good state. You see, so sharing this message with kids is very important for our future. We have to encourage them, support them, and sharing experiences, big adventures like this is also very important to make people do.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And with these last words, I will leave you. Up next, we will meet with a human swan, no less, Sacha Dench. Up next, I'm about to meet with biologist, conservationist, ambassador for the UN Convention on Migratory Species, and human swan, Sacha Dench. Her story, her love story with nature started underwater, and she had to fight a debilitating fear of flying to become a swan herself. She has an incredible story and has been fighting for migratory species, for also the underwater world. I'm welcoming Sacha Dench. Hi, Sacha.
Hello, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to talk to you. As I said, you started off being very comfortable underwater, and you had quite a journey going into the air. Can you explain perhaps your first steps into fighting for nature? Obviously, you're a biologist, but you also started off in the water. I'd love to hear that to start with.
Yeah, I suppose my passion for all things underwater started from growing up on the northern beaches of Sydney and down the kind of the east coast. I spent a lot of time underwater as a child. That is completely my comfort zone. Since I was a small child, I knew I could hold my breath long enough to scare people, long enough to win any mermaid competitions with friends. And so that was definitely my comfort zone. But spending so much time underwater, I spent a lot of time observing things. My dad was a surfer and things, but I was always underwater. I observed a lot of different issues over time. But rather than looking at them and complaining about them, I started to see them and think, actually, quite a lot of things I was seeing were fixable, and they were fixable if you could talk to the people that were causing it, but in the right way. So I started to look at things like boat anchors dragging through seagrass and thinking, yes, that's awful. I could respond with outrage, or I could be very pragmatic about it and try and think of a solution. And if you go to the right people, try and put that into place. And I guess I just slowly found that was an approach that worked. But yeah, my love for all things underwater started from that being my comfort zone.
You told me you used to be quite frustrated at the fact that you had to be doing something crazy or showing athletic ability to be able to get people to care about nature. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so when I first started taking on, I suppose, bigger issues, I was a trained biologist, and I would do things like, for example, the sharknets off the coast of Sydney. Was very frustrated at the fact that they were not as people had assumed they were, and they were catching a lot of animals that were not the target species, and there'd been no environmental risk assessment done on the whole process. So from a practical, logical, and even safety point of view, none of it made any sense to me. So I got information through Freedom of Information and gathered lots of data. And as a scientist, people were this interested in what I had to say. And then when I started to go out with a camera and film and photograph what I was seeing, they were a bit more interested. But as soon as I became Australian freediving champion and I was a sports personality, suddenly they were disinterested in what I had to say. And I was outraged. In fact, sometimes I didn't even mention as I was a biologist as well. So no mention of expertise. And I was, very frustrated at this idea. And then when I realized actually that it was reaching a lot more people, it was getting a lot of traction. It gave us a lot more ammunition to create change. Then there was actually no point in fighting it, and I should just go with it. If the human story, the human endeavor was a way of getting through to people and generating change, why fight that? It's human nature.
So this brings us to the flight of the swans. You left the underwater world where you were so comfortable and decided to take on quite a scary mission for you. Can you share what you decided to do in 2016 and how difficult that was for you?
Oof, how difficult. I'll save that one. So in 2016, I was asked by researchers from all along the migratory flyway of the Buick Swan, that's all the way from the Russian Arctic to the UK. I was asked to help them figure out how we could solve some of the problems for the Buick Swan. They were declining very fast. We lost about half of them in the last 20 years. And the real challenge with the Buick Swan and many migratory species is that there are different threats they face in all the different countries they fly through. So there's, between 11 and 14 countries the birds are crossing, lots of different issues. The challenge that people had was, how do you get lots of different people in different industries, from power companies to the shooting industries to farming to government officials looking at wetland habitats to fish farmers. How do you get them all interested in trying to help us save a bird, and all at the same time, where every country and every industry could say, well, there's no point in me doing my bit if the other industry or the other countries aren't doing their bit, because overall they aren't going to make a big enough difference. And so, my task was to figure out, how can we get them all interested at the same time? And I was basically being asked, how can you get people into meetings? And I thought, well, you can't, the bird is declining so fast. There's so many different issues that getting people to meetings isn't going to work, and it isn't going to work fast enough. And the big problem is the story you're trying to tell people is such a miserable one, lots of dying birds, and you're part of the problem. How can we reframe that into something really exciting they're going to want to be a part of? And I just kept looking at the migration of the birds. And I've said many times, the birds migrate from Russia to the UK. But when you really imagine what that's like, it's a journey from the land of polar bears and their nomadic reindeer breeders all the way across the wildest wetlands in the world, some of the densest forests of the Russian taiga, across farmlands, castles, stormy seas, and dodging bullets. We know a lot of the birds get shot. That story, if you could bring that to life, is a kind of James Bond of the bird world. Would that work? Could that be enough? And not only that, what I had to do then was figure out how to bring that story to life. And I thought about putting cameras on birds, which was causing all sorts of different issues, getting photographers to follow them, but they cross some areas where there are no roads and no runways. And then I realized in this paraglider that I fly in for doing some aerial photographs at that time, I could actually fly at the same speed and altitude as the birds. I suffer many of the same challenges of constantly being on the lookout for safe landing sites, avoiding stormy weather, difficult takeoffs and landings. And I could probably fly the migration route with the birds, see for myself the challenges they face, the impacts on the habitats they're using along the flyway, some of them ones that scientists aren't getting to, but I could also stop and talk to people. On a paramotor, you take off and land on your feet, so I don't need roads, I don't need runways. I could stop and talk to people all along the flyway and figure out not only what might be missing in the problems for the VueX1, but also rally lots of people to help us try and save them.
You've told me there's no way that you land with a paramotor and nobody comes to ask you what it is that you're doing. Can you share what that human experience, what those conversations are like?
Yeah, so the nice thing about flying a paramotor, you're basically flying, hanging under a big handkerchief with a fan on your back. And when you land, particularly when I take my helmet off and people can see that I'm female, they pretty much always ask the same 3 questions. Where have you come from? Isn't it dangerous? And how can I help? And that just proved to be a perfect conversation starter for speaking to people about the VueX1, the journey of the VueX1, and getting them to save them. And the human connection that people have with you is probably the most powerful thing of the whole expedition. Yeah.
You said that you actually grew up hearing that you don't come to these conversations with prejudice, that you are quite happy to hear the point of view of farmers, of people who don't necessarily realize that they can actually act and do things, and that you have quite an open mind in when you approach these conversations. Could you share that with us?
Yeah, so I suppose my background was quite nomadic. I moved, I think, to 11 schools before I was 14, something like that. So I moved to different places around Australia, from very urban to very rural. I grew up in the Australian bush some of the time on a cattle station, but also in the city. Some of my time also in Switzerland, and some of the time in Suffolk in England. So I spent time in lots of different communities, including in hunting and part of my childhood. Whilst some in our community were protesting for saving the forests, others were heavily my other really good friends were heavily in the logging industry, for example. So I very much grew up with people close to me on different sides of an argument. So I'm very pragmatic about trying to, the power, I suppose, of empathy, not seeing empathy as being kind of a soft thing, or being weak, but empathy being a really powerful tool in trying to figure out what drives different people, and how can you actually find either a common interest to make change, but also find solutions. So I think that empathy that I developed growing up, meeting and speaking with a lot of different people, is one of the most powerful things. So when I land in a community, I think the key thing at the beginning is to really be open, also very humble, and try and get inside different people's heads and understand where they're coming from. And what I found all along the flyway, for example, where people would say, oh, if you go into hunting communities saying that hunting is bad, you will get a very negative welcome. And what I found nearly at every place along the route, certainly in the hunting communities, where people would say something like, if you care so much about the swans that you're prepared to do that to try and save them, then I want to know more. And quite a lot of people said, well, if this is such a problem, why has nobody come to speak to us about this before? You know, if we'd known that the population was declining so heavily, we could have done something. And so I think often actually scientists not knowing quite how to reach the right people has been a bit of a problem. So we found, people all the way from the Russian Outlook to the UK offering, even those that had very little or were living kind of at the limits of existence, and with very little resources, were saying, you know, why has nobody asked us before? And when I told stories to people about what other individuals were doing, small changes that had made a difference, they would quite often say, well, we could do our bit. What can we do?
Speaking of being prepared to doing what you do, actually was quite a bit more complicated for you than not necessarily for others. You've shared with me that you were terrified of flying. Why did you do that?
Why did I learn to fly? I developed a fear of flying, any turbulence in aircraft, after a horrendous flight in Panama, where we were in a very small plane. The other planes had turned back, and our pilot thought that he could outrun this big storm that was developing, and he couldn't. So we ended up spending 40 minutes being thrown around in this small plane, not able to find this one tiny landing strip on one tiny island in Panama. And so that was a pretty terrifying 40 minutes where we had no information. And so I only started flying a paraglider to try and get over my fear of turbulence in the air, which I thought I could get over if I actually understood air and air movements. And a paraglider was a really good way of doing that, because when you're in it, you are connected to the wing with lots of fine lines, so you can feel what the air is doing and really learn to read it, even though you can't see it. So I suffered with the paragliding for about 2 years just to get over the fear of going into planes, before I actually realized that I was starting to enjoy it, starting to thermal. And then I realized what a powerful tool it could be if you could put a propeller on the back and go anywhere. The aerial imagery for conservation is a really incredible tool. So yeah, that's why I took on the paragliding. At first was just about getting over a fear, and then I realized it was such an incredible tool to use. And once I've got a vision of something that could really have a big impact, I can get over all the other hurdles that are in the way.
And now you're so comfortable that you told me you even play Spotify when you're in turbulence. You had a Spotify playlist for when you were flying over the Russian tundra. What was in that playlist?
Oh gosh, what was in the playlist? I basically, before I went on the expedition, I knew the Russian tundra was going to be a really, really stunning place to fly, really beautiful. I also knew nobody had flown paramotors across it before, and it was quite likely to be turbulent, difficult place to fly. So I wanted some music that could be calming when times got tough and you were having to actively fly the paraglider all the time. But I also wanted a playlist that could imprint a kind of a memory of what I was seeing visually with a soundtrack, so that I could take myself back there into the future. So I asked the public to send in suggestions of music that I'm unlikely to have known before from other countries, that I could create into a playlist. So to be honest, I would have it on play straight into my headphones. So I didn't ever really look at what the songs were. I know Ozark Henry, a Belgian musician, has a few songs within that. There's some Italian love songs that I probably wouldn't listen to if I understood the lyrics, but they are, to me, very much now the sound of crossing the Russian tundra. So I just play it on those occasions when I want to go back there.
What's the next expedition that you're planning?
So the very next expedition is one that's a little bit different. I set up Conservation Without Borders to do more expeditions around the world, but looking at it through the eyes of migratory species and the aerial and underwater side. But with experiences of the last expedition with the swans, realizing that climate change was not only a contributing factor, a big issue, it was also the exacerbating factor in pretty much all the other threats to the birds. So climate change was becoming a bigger and bigger issue. And Alexia spoke earlier of the Australian bushfires. In January last year, we lost our house in the Australian bushfires. It was a pretty huge moment in my life. We'd fought bushfires before, but this one was 20, 40 kilometres long. It was really wide, and it was about 11 kilometres high, and it sped towards our house at faster than the maximum rate it had been predicted. And we had to just walk away from the house and not even try to protect it. It was a massive moment, and it was a moment that put climate change from an academic issue in my head to one that drives everything that I do. So I couldn't not look at my expedition model. I fly with a paraglider, which uses wings and air, but I also have a petrol engine. I have a support crew of vehicles as well. So my next expedition is trying to decarbonize the expedition model with a flight all around the UK. So can I do that all using electricity? So I'm flying with this electric-powered motor and speaking to people who've got solutions to climate change all along the way, in the hope that we can tell a really inspiring story of not only that change is possible, but there are amazing innovators out there that can help take us there if we all decide to back them. And that's my next big feat. I'm setting off on in about 3 weeks' time. And the one after that is following the Osprey all the way from Scotland to Ghana.
And to end on a positive note, you shared with me that the swan population is actually doing better. Can you tell us why you feel optimistic about what you do and about those conversations that you're having?
Why do I feel optimistic? I guess that was one thing, realizing that on the last expedition, I found, apart from a school in Rochester, a school grounds in Rochester, absolutely everybody gave us a positive welcome. They were interested in hearing stories about what we were finding out, but also the power of reframing a story from one of lots of swans are dying, you're part of the problem. So climate change is really bad, you're part of the problem. Trying to get us out of that idea of fear and showing stories of optimism. Just seeing how that can change the way that people think. That, I suppose, was really powerful. And because I've seen it in people from different backgrounds, in different countries, again and again and again. So people were excited about the idea of this crazy lady trying to be a swan. They were intrigued by the research and the science when I told it without kind of fear. But what really made them start putting their hand up and saying, I can help, was telling stories about other people that had an idea or that were creating change. So when people could see that their small part in this big global puzzle of climate change actually could really add up, because there are lots of other people who were doing the same thing. When I saw the power of reframing a story and changing people's attitudes, it made me think, if we can keep on doing that and on a global scale, I really think that we can make a difference.
Thank you so much, Sacha, and best of luck in your next adventure. Thank you very much for following this session of the ChangeNOW Summit about explorers for the Earth. I've been Daphnée Denis. Thank you very much.